Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's July 4th, Friday, 2025, episode 429. And of course, we're going to talk about something related to America's independence. And so we're going to talk about how taxation with representation is worse than what people were complaining about 200 and some years ago. Anyways, this is the third July 4th holiday episode that I'm recording on this channel. And it kind of gives you an idea of what it's like to preach a sermon on Christmas Day for over 20 years, right? Like, what are you going to say this year that might be different from last year? Well, the first time, so for 2 years ago when I started this channel, July 4th, I talked about freedom, value, and responsibility. That was episode 27. And I talked about the subjectivity of value. Um, but now in the United States, we consider it absolute right freedom to be absolutely my understanding of value, good, and the right thing to do. And so a lot of people celebrate freedom, but they're actually afraid of freedom because of all of the liability, responsibility that comes along with freedom. But the responsibility is a good thing. It forces us to have to do research and then have some kind of insurance, a plan B, if you will, if we're not going to go with an insurance company. So freedom with responsibility was a theme of that episode. Then last year, episode 135, I talked about how freedom is for people with problems. You might remember that if you were listening back then. People who don't care about freedom and rights and things of that nature, they don't care because they're comfortable and they have very few significant problems in their lives. These are generally your authoritarians, meddlers, what do you call those people? People, not just Karens, but oh, I keep saying Nancy in my head, but basic nanny state people, right? So um, because they have few problems, they see problems with everybody else, and they don't want other people's choices to interfere with their comfortable life. And so they go kind of crazy that way. That might be an interesting explanation as to why Karens are Karens. But anyway, we need freedom to solve problems, right? So those people who are not comfortable and have significant problems in their lives, well, they need to solve those problems. And so you need freedom to be able to do so. Restricting freedom works well for those comfortable, that small number of comfortable people, but that comfort that they experience creates problems for the rest of us. So we need freedom to make our lives better. That was last year's theme. And so what do we talk about this year? Well, let's talk about taxation. One of the 20 or so reasons that Americans went to war with England, and we call it the American Revolution, 250 years ago, was because of the stamp tax. So the stamp tax led to that rallying cry, no taxation without representation, right? And it was a 1 to 3% tax on paper. Just to be safe, we'll call it a 3% tax, right? So it was only on goods that required paper, like legal documents, playing cards, anything that was on paper. And keep in mind, too, back then, everything was on paper. There was no internet. And so a lot of the things that we're doing on the internet required paper back in the day, newspapers and whatnot. And all of that required a tax. And the tax was paid, because a stamp was put on the tax, either a literal stamp, like a postage stamp, or a emboss, like an embossing kind of thing, where you raise you put it on something and you squeeze these two metal plates together and it creates a pattern, a raised pattern on the paper, right? So that's how you paid the tax for that paper. It affected wealthy people and the poor. But the the principle was the tax itself, right? So if you could pass this tax, then what's to stop you from imposing more taxes and greater taxes? And being able to impose a tax without representation, well, you can't object to it, you can't debate it, and so therefore no taxation without representation. But keeping in mind that even if we did have representation, it would have made no difference, right? Because of the parliamentary system that existed in England. So you get a small part of the British Empire. I read that Ryan McMakin, who I will be quoting briefly in a moment, said basically Parliament was about 500 members at the time. So the US colonies may get 20 seats. So if 500 people are voting in favor of or 480 people are voting in favor of raising the taxes on the American colonies, and 20 people saying no, well, yeah, taxation with representation, it doesn't really change a whole lot. But they perhaps wanted the opportunity to raise an objection and to debate. Fast forward to today, and interestingly enough, Donald Trump is signing the big, beautiful bill, the BBB, today, July 4th, 2025. And I guess he's doing it uh, deliberately on July 4th because he believes that it is the start to some sort of new American independence. And what a lot of people don't really seem to connect is that basically it's a big tax hike, right? It's going to result in more government spending, more government debt, which is basically inflation for the country, which is a tax, right? Inflation is a tax. And so I just thought it was kind of funny how no taxation without representation. And then Donald Trump is signing one of the biggest tax bills, tax hikes in American history on July 4th. I mean, it is kind of funny if you think about it in a sick, dark, evil kind of way, right? People didn't vote for this, right? People wanted to see government cut, right? And I see a bunch of Trump cultists, right? So people with Trump derangement syndrome in the positive way that this is what they voted for, right? And I think it's only because they're focusing on certain things that are in the bill, which they like maybe border protection and more spending on the military. But all of the other stuff is gone, right? Illegal welfare for illegal immigrants, things like that. All of those regulatory rollbacks are gone. And in episode 426, a few episodes ago, I go into a little bit more detail about that. So check that out if you want. But basically, the BBB is all about big spending increases. And that, again, as I said, is a tax hike for you and me. I did not vote for this, and neither did most Americans. And so, therefore, I say taxation with representation sucks even more, right? It's even worse, right? So, why don't we just say taxation is theft and leave it at that, right? Whether you have representation or not. I mean, it doesn't matter. It always sucks. So we are paying for a bigger government, which means more interference in our lives. And I have mentioned Palantir before. It's that surveillance system which now centralizes all information collection so that the government can snoop on us more efficiently. Trump says that neither Israel or Iran know what the F they're doing. Well, I think that Trump and Congress don't know what the F they're doing, with a few exceptions, of course. They are all pawns of the system, of the deep state. There is an article I just happened to see it. It came up in my email. Mises Wire has an article by Ryan McMakin, "The Spirit of Declaration of Independence: Secession, Division, and Disloyalty." And I'll quote from it, a single quote. "Thus, to act in the spirit of the Declaration of Independence today is to reject calls for loyalty, unity, or respect for the regime's so-called rule of law. Rather, the Declaration of Independence represents disloyalty, disunity, and a disregard for the law as laid down by the political ruling class, right? And end quote. And so he's very specific. It's secession. The American Revolution was a secession. It wasn't a non-secession, as a lot of people want to argue, because they don't want it ruins their narrative of the Civil War that secession is pro-slavery, right? And so you can't, because of, and it goes back to what I was saying before, because of their marriage, people are wedded to certain ideologies. You can't, right? You cut yourself off from better, deeper understandings, right? So you're going to uh, champion a very subjective, narrow understanding of a concept or what's happening in the world, just so that you can maintain your other belief. And in this case, secession is pro-slavery, right? And so you can never, at any point, anywhere, ever say that secession is a good thing, especially the beginning of the United States. So it was a secession. It was a rejection of not only British rule, but all rule, right? It was very much anarcho-capitalist in its vibe, shall I say, right? So it was not for democracy or equality. Rather, it was for self-determination, not for this government to self-determine, but for each individual in this country to have the ability and the rights, the freedom to determine how they were going to live their own personal life. If you look at our so-called republic slash democracy today, most of the politicians in Washington, D.C. are millionaires profiting off of the laws that they're writing for themselves. They do not represent the interests of the people like me and probably like you, right? We voted for no war, and now there are drum saber rattling going on in Washington, D.C. I mean, come on, drag out all of those people who are pro-war in Congress, primary them, get rid of them, right? Expose AIPAC, right, for what it is, and kick them out of the country. I mean, do whatever you need to do to take this country back. So secession, and Ryan McMakin makes a very he points out that secession has no legal basis. And when you say legal basis, he means on the written law, the law written by the government. Of course, secession has no legal basis. It is rather a natural right, right? It is inherent to us as human beings to secede, to be able to have the freedom to determine how our lives are going to turn out. And so he calls for the contempt, right? The hatred for the legal established order. And of course, a lot of people have a problem with this because it flies in the face of the love for Donald Trump or Obama or Biden or Harris or Gavin Newsom or whoever hero people are going to elevate, right, as their champion. No, utter contempt for it, right? Why would I support someone who only uh, who with whom I only agree with sometimes, occasionally? Why would I give that person power over my entire life? No, I have utter contempt for the legal established order. And it's that blind loyalty to a person, whether it's Trump or Obama or Clinton, whatever, is a blind loyalty to a person, not a principle, which has taken America down the wrong road, right? So the person is not perfect, but you feel like you have to support that person absolutely with everything. And what that does is it takes you down the wrong road because you're not following a principle any longer. You're just simply following a flawed person who does not care about the Constitution, who does not care about July 4th, does not care about freedom, independence, secession, right? Self-determination, doesn't care about any of that stuff. So this year, I encourage you and exhort you to celebrate Secession Day, brought to you by people with guns and who really understood freedom and independence. Happy July 4th, and I will talk to you next time.